Hello everyone! I originally had a whole other opening for this, but I tossed it out because instead I want to talk to you about the online citizen. As I'll discuss in this episode, one of the crucial ways the PAP wins elections is by controlling the information that voters receive. Central to that is control of the media. What we learn about Singapore and the world, and thus how we understand it, is tightly controlled by the PAP government, which directly funds or controls all the mainstream media in Singapore, whether print, broadcast, or online. The online citizen is the main exception to this, and for over a decade now, Terry Shi has run the online citizen to bring to you, the people, news which the mainstream media is not allowed to cover. This includes Oxley Road, Benjamin Lim's suicide, MINDEF's stealing of Dr. Ting Chun Ming's patent, and so many other stories. Imagine if we did not have the online citizen, the government would be getting away with so much nonsense. Naturally, the PAP government has repeatedly sought to shut down TOC. They have used POFMA mercilessly against them. TOC is by far the most POFMA organization, almost 20 incidents covering goodness knows how many statements, because it also reports on other people who get POFMA. So basically in 2021, TOC was forced out of Singapore. The government loaded TOC down with so much regulatory hassle and paperwork, like demanding that Terry account for every single penny he ever earned or spent. Terry said basically, look, that's impossible for me to comply with. And then the government said, oh, look, TOC refuses to comply with our very reasonable request. And also they harassed and sued Terry. They even jailed him for criminal defamation for a crime of publishing in 2018 a letter claiming corruption in the highest echelons of Singapore. And then in 2023, it turned out there had been corruption in 2018 because Iswaran was convicted of it. Surely they should set aside his conviction and apologize to him. But they haven't. And he's even dealt with so much victim blaming. Why can't Terry be more strategic? Surely Terry knows what he's getting into. It's Terry's fault for taking on the government. Why does Terry keep hitting the PAP government's fist to his face? Why is Terry bruising the poor PAP's feet with his buttocks? Tusk, tusk, tusk. So even through all this, even though he was barely drawing a salary, and in fact there are months where he only paid himself like 500 Singapore dollars or even nothing at all, he has persevered and continued to fight. So Terry now needs your help to contest the latest POFMA against him. Edwin Tong, also known as Shanmugam's Mini-Me, POFMA TOC for an article about the extensive renovations at Rideout Road. Edwin Tong claims it says first, quote, the Singapore Land Authority has given Minister Shanmugam assurances of an extension to the lease of 26 Rideout Road beyond its expiry in 2027. The problem is that the article never said that. The article actually asks, if the lease expires in 2027, why approve large-scale modifications? And has SLA provided any private assurances that he, Shanmugam, will be able to retain the lease? Second, the POFMA claims the article says, quote, the Urban Redevelopment Authority and the Building and Construction Authority did not ensure that all their requisite approvals were obtained for the works carried out at 26 Rideout Road. What the article actually notes is that the permits are not on the websites, which is a different thing. And also notes that the authorities refused to answer Terry's questions about the URA records. And finally, the POFMA claims the article says, quote, public funds have been used to pay for the earthworks at 26 Rideout Road carried out since 2024. But what the article actually asks is, who is funding the modifications? You know, I've talked about how stupid and abused POFMA is. Remember, Ong Ye Kung said when POFMA was introduced that it would only be used for intentional falsehoods that cause public harm. But then they started just POFMAing anything, everyone they disagreed with, even if it was not intentional or caused public harm. We've had POFMAs where opinions were taken as statements of facts. We've had POFMAs where the government argued that if a statement can be interpreted by anyone in any way which is false, then it is automatically a false statement. We've had POFMAs where repeatedly saying something is not true or that you don't know something is the same as setting out a case that it is true. And now we have a POFMA where questions are taken as statements of fact. How on earth can a question be a statement? Those are literally mutually exclusive semantic categories. What on earth is the government going to argue now? Oh, by asking a series of speculative and rhetorical questions, Terry is actually planting in people's minds the idea that it might not be true. I mean, come on. While on the subject, remember that it is a fact that in 2020, the annual salary of Temasek CEO Ho Ching was more than 100 million Sing dollars a year, that it is a fact that Singapore continues to engage in the arms trade with Israel, and it is a fact that Singapore-made arms have been used by Israel against Palestinians in Gaza since the current conflict started in October 2023. All these statements were not POFMA, so they must be true. Anyway, Terry is now trying to fight all this nonsense in court, which is a hugely expensive and time-consuming process, and he needs your help. He needs to raise $15,000 just to get started, and if it goes subsequently to the Court of Appeal, another 30,000 Sing dollars for that case. Please donate to him at this link on your screen or in the description below. Please support Terry and the Online Citizen. He is fighting for you, he is fighting for a better Singapore, and we need to support him. Good luck, Terry. Welcome back. So it's been about a month since the 2025 general elections, and as many of you know, my pet peeve is that people keep acting like Singapore's elections actually reflect the opinions of Singapore's voters. Like this guy.
Singaporeans have given the PAP a clear and strong mandate to govern.
Larry, you guys rigged the election and then you celebrate the outcome as a victory? That's like the former president of Turkmenistan, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, who kept rigging contests for himself to win and then celebrating as if he actually won. This guy. What is up with authoritarian leaders showing off by lifting weights? Huh? Like, does that somehow make it easier for you to crush the dignity of the people? Anyway, Larry, the only mandates going on were these dinner dates that current or former cabinet members Ng Chee Meng, Ong Ye Kung, Chee Hong Tat and Lim Swee Say had with Su Haijin. Are you going to investigate those? Don't you think it's a huge conflict of interest for some of your most important ministers to have been hanging out during COVID with a money launderer? Anyway, in my last episode, I reminded all of you that Singapore is not a democracy. In fact, since 2015, I've been talking about how Singapore's elections are neither free nor fair, as I did in my podcast or here on the show. But Singapore is also not static. Things change. We also learn new things. So today, we're going to talk about Singapore's elections and how things have changed in the last 15 years. And then in the next episode, I'll talk about the changing role of the Workers' Party and other political parties in Singapore. So, to start, remember that Singapore's elections have never been designed to actually reflect what voters want. Quite the opposite. They have always been intended to suppress the will of the people. Singapore's elections were introduced by the British colonial government in 1948 because Singaporeans were extremely unhappy about the partition of Malaya and the division of Singapore's people from their families in the rest of Malaya. The initial electorate was only British subjects though. So in our first election, on an island where 75% of the people were Chinese, the voters were all Indian and British, who elected mostly Indian and British representatives. Now, that obviously was ridiculous, so the electorate was slowly expanded. So by 1955, we had Singapore's first reasonably free and fair election. To British consternation, Singaporeans promptly voted for radical left-wing pro-Labour anti-colonial parties like the Labour Front and the PAP, who both pledged to throw the British out. David Marshall, a Jew with a great vision for Singapore, became our first chief minister. This was 1955, but don't forget, Singapore is not ready for a non-Chinese PM. And so the British never made the mistake of holding a free and fair election again. And the PAP, after they won the 1959 election, have learned from that and also never held a free and fair election. Over time, they have systematically designed the elections to maximize the outcomes by making it as unfair as possible. We think Singapore's elections are just like other former British colonies, but actually our elections have become unique in the whole world for how they work, because they rest basically on two crucial mechanisms that nobody else combines, because they both produce very skewed outcomes. So nobody uses them both together, because then you would get a mega super duper ultra skewed election. Except of course, Singapore. It's like putting sambal belacan on top of kimchi. I mean, I love sambal and I love kimchi, but you put them together and my toilet is going to have third-degree burns, if you know what I mean. Okay, first is first past the post, right? This system elects the person who gets the most votes regardless of whether they reach 50% of the vote, as we saw in the 2011 presidential election. You can win with a minority of the vote. First past the post is highly criticized for producing very lopsided and unrepresentative outcomes. The Labour Party in the UK, for example, was elected last year with a massive 411 out of 650 seats, but only on the basis of 33.7%, one-third of the vote. Earlier this year in local elections in the UK, Labour narrowly won the mayoralties of North Tyneside and Doncaster with just 30% of the vote on 30% of turnout. In other words, only around 10% of all voters voted for the winner in both cases. Second is compulsory voting, which was introduced in 1959, which the British introduced because they wanted to force people who are not politically interested or engaged to vote, on the assumption that those people would be more conservative and hence less anti-colonial in how they vote. Both systems are so problematic that most countries don't use either system anymore. While first past the post used to be far more widespread due to the British Empire, only around 38 countries out of over 200 use it today. And only 21 countries have compulsory voting and only 10 of them actually enforce it. But here's the interesting thing. Singapore is the only country in the world that combines first past the post with compulsory voting. Why is this problematic? Well, first, studies have shown that when people who are not interested or totally informed about politics suddenly have to vote, they would be less likely than well-informed voters to use their votes wisely and know who to vote for, and therefore would tend to just vote randomly. So political scientists like Keith Jackie and Sun Guan Zhen, for example, argue that encouraging high turnout through compulsory voting distorts electoral outcomes because the result will approximate a coin toss. Even people who argue for compulsory voting, like Lisa Hill, agree that compulsory voting does not work when combined with a first-past-the-post system, which is why only one country in the world is crazy enough to do it. So for the Singapore case, what happens when a large group of politically apathetic voters who are uninterested in politics are forced to vote every 5 years? We actually know, because the Institute of Policy Studies did a study on such voters after the PAP lost Sengkang in the 2020 general election. It found a clear correlation between level of political engagement and interest and voting for a non-PAP party. And conversely, a clear correlation between a lack of political interest and education and voting PAP. It's why, for example, the PAP bans opinion polls from being published during the election. It's to prevent tactical voting and keep people politically ignorant. Basically, the IPS study shows that the fewer informed, engaged, interested voters we have, the better the PAP does. So what effectively happens every election is a large chunk of the population who are politically apathetic are forced to go to the polls, and naturally they just vote the PAP by default because they don't know any other party. It's like that Martian news video where people on the street were asked to identify politicians and...
If I'm not wrong, he's on PAP. PAP? I don't know.
Look at his color, look at his shirt color.
Purple color shirt.
Oh, that one, that one is, what's her name? Danish Dang. Or Lanis Dang.
Dang correct, but what's her name?
Oh, Alexis, sorry.
Okay, good.
Yeah, she's wearing blue, so I think like PAP.
Full name. Okay, what her party?
PAP?
Alamak. But think about it. They all vaguely knew the candidates, but then when they asked what party, they all said PAP. What does that tell you? Now, this is only one factor. On top of this, we have all the other factors that I talked about previously in Season 1, Episode 2 and 3. Please watch those episodes again if you want more detail. But to summarize, first we have blatant and extreme gerrymandering and the wiping out of any constituency which is almost lost, like what happened to Dr. Chee Soon Juan in Bukit Batok. We have the GRCs, which effectively compound the issue by having block votes, which are also really distortionary. An easy way to understand it is that they're like the electoral college in the USA. So if you have a state and you get 50.1% of the votes in the state, you should get 50.1% of the seats, right? But no, in the electoral college, you get all of the seats. Likewise, in a GRC, if you get 50.1% of the votes in a GRC, you should get half the seats, right? No, you get all the seats. You see, so it's really unfair because it magnifies really what is just half the vote into 100% of the vote. So even though the Democrats won the popular vote 5 times between 2000 and 2020, they lost the presidency 3 out of the 6 times. That's the easy way to understand the GRC problem. Everyone hates the Electoral College and complains about its distortionary effects, so naturally the PAP imported American politics here. The PAP retroactively justified the GRCs based on race, but of course the GRCs are completely unnecessary for race. You can achieve the exact same effect as the current GRC system by simply designating 15 single-member constituencies to have a Malay candidate, 9 to have an Indian, and so on. Or through a party list or proportional system as is done elsewhere, such as New Zealand where there's a Maori electoral roll. There's plenty of fairer, more representative solutions. And of course, timing, both of the EBRC report announcing new boundaries and the election periods being ridiculously short. Then there is fear, which I talked about in Season 1, Episode 3. Attacking opposition politicians, punishing voters who vote against the government, denying resources to opposition constituencies, lawsuits, arrests, harassment, the belief that your vote is not secret. In fact, a 2017 study by Ostwald and Rimbaugh looked at the 2011 and 2015 elections and found that between 8% and 25% of voters voted against their preferences out of fear that they would be punished. To give some context, in the 2011 elections, if just 11% of voters, which is well within that 8 to 25% range, had changed their votes, assuming an even swing across all constituencies, the PAP would have lost the 2011 election outright. So the fear has a real impact. Here at New Narrative, we wanted to know how people voted, so we did a sort of exit poll where we surveyed voters using our usual survey partner, Vast.ai, after the election. Exit polls are totally normal in other countries, and how they work is that when you come out of the polling center, a pollster will ask you, hey, who'd you vote for? And you just tell them. And people in other countries have few problems saying who they voted for. But in Singapore, even though it was an anonymous survey using an app on your phone, 18% of people we surveyed declined to tell us who they voted for, with over half of those people giving hostile or fearful responses. We got answers like, why should I tell you? You have no rights to know. I decline to comment as I feel that my vote is secret. You should not be asking me these kinds of questions as well. I have already voted. Voting is secret. Must I tell you who I vote? Why you want to know? I cannot anyhow disclose who I voted as it is a secret, you know, right? But my favorite by far is this guy. I voted for PAP because I love that they were able to make Singapore grow so much and Worker Party very useless one every day, do nothing, sit there, shake leg, Tobo still can become MP. Walao a bracket, opposite day, close bracket. Opposite day! This genius managed to both tell us who he voted for while giving himself complete deniability both ways. This is what Singaporeans have to do to avoid getting in trouble. The fear is real, guys. Anyway, link to the full survey results here in the description below. Feel free to go through the results yourself. Another reason for Singaporeans' ignorance is a very one-sided media environment, which in the last decade has only gotten worse. Because in 2021, Singapore Press Holdings was essentially nationalised. It is now directly funded by the government, so editors no longer even hide the fact that they are the PAP propaganda arm. We can't even believe their circulation numbers. That's how much fake news they put out. But more insidious is how our education system is designed to promote loyalty to the PAP by inculcating PAP values and perspectives into children from a young age. Like everything else, this was introduced in the 1980s after you-know-who scared the PAP into thinking they might start losing elections. So again, this was done to show up loyalty to the PAP. Today, it's called character and citizenship education. These lessons erupted into controversy last year when very one-sided and historically inaccurate slides on Israel and the genocide in Gaza were taught to students as young as primary school, causing great anger among Singaporeans and especially their parents. We talked about this back in episode 1 of this season. So indoctrination starts at a very young age in Singapore. The point is how we think, our values, our assumptions from a very young age are shaped purposefully by the PAP so that we will always think like them, agree with them, and therefore naturally vote for them. So put it all together. You have first past the post, which creates lopsided election results, and compulsory voting, which forces politically ignorant and apathetic people to vote, and block voting via the GRCs, which magnifies marginal results, and total media control and educational indoctrination, which makes people think like the PAP, and a lack of political education, which makes people politically ignorant and apathetic, and massive fear, which makes people automatically vote for the PAP out of fear. And that's even without mentioning the gerrymandering, the timing, and so many other issues like rules around party financing and spending and the lack of transparency. So it's almost impossible for PAP to lose an election. It's like the PAP went out and looked for the electoral systems which distort electoral results the most and then put them all together. Kimchi mixed with belacan is delicious. But you know what would make it perfect? Some vindaloo curry and habanero peppers. But things also evolve, and in particular, there's been one massive change in how elections have been run in the last 15 years, and that is vote buying. Vote buying is pretty common in the countries around Singapore, where candidates give out food or even cash in exchange for a voter's vote. Last time, Akong held Singapore and his party to a higher standard and did not indulge in such behaviour. But all this changed in 2011. Remember, if not for fear, the PAP would have outright lost that election. Why? Because of our economic model. From the 1990s, we had growth at all costs, which included wage suppression of Singaporeans to preserve capitalist profitability, as well as the mass importation of low-wage foreign labour for exploitation. I explained all this in the previous 2 episodes of the show, so check those out if you want to understand more. Long story short, as Dr. Goh Keng Swee predicted, by 2011 we were hugely underpaid and Singapore was totally overcrowded with people, and as a result we had huge strains on our infrastructure, housing and healthcare. Remember how in 2013 we had our largest non-pink dot protest ever on migration? And the PAP knew how angry we were, which is why they convened the 2010 Economic Strategies Committee, which laid out a different direction for Singapore, which, as I explained in previous episodes, has not been followed. But in 2011, the PAP lost Aljunied GRC, and in their desperation, they handed the car keys to Tharman, who then introduced the most important new feature of Singapore's elections, the handout. It was called the Pioneer Generation Package and had huge success in 2015. The PAP won back Punggol East. Aljunied went to a recount. This led the PAP doubling down on this tactic. And as Singaporeans get poorer, as there are more poor people in Singapore, these handouts become more important. As Singapore Democratic Party Chairman Dr. Paul Thum found out the hard way.
One issue which does come up is the $1 meal. These meals are very popular. And in fact, just this afternoon, a resident of Bukit Panjang told us that he voted us in GE 2020, but he said that the current MP organized these $1 meals from more than a year ago. And he showed me a very colorful brochure where he checked off every month as he got his $1 meal for his month. And at the end of the visit, he said, you know, I like you, but those $1 meals did make a difference to me and my fellow citizens. I took his point. So I did some research. As far as we can tell, the funding has been provided by the People's Association, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. But while we may not have access to these funds right now, we are confident that we can find some other way to fund this project or a better project.
This is the same sort of vote-buying politics that people complain about in Malaysia or Indonesia or Thailand or the Philippines. Voters in all those countries aren't stupid. They consistently say, yes, we want more accountability, we want better governance, we want more democracy. But those things take time. They happen next year. If we don't eat tomorrow, we starve. So we take the money now. Studies across Southeast Asia have shown that vote buying is a very common and effective way of getting poor people to vote for you. So it's no surprise that the PAP are doing it too, particularly as poverty is increasing in Singapore. Look at what one of our survey respondents said. I voted for People Action Party because the government also under PAP, which gave us money to help a little bit with my financial expenses. The PAP are taking advantage by handing out food and welfare and subsidies to help with our poverty. Poverty that was caused by the PAP's economic model. And this increases reliance on PAP handouts because voters know if the PAP loses in your constituency, all those lifelines get taken away. And the PAP know this. In response to Dr. Paul, his opponent, Liang Yinghua, could have said, oh no, we don't engage in vote buying, that's wrong. But instead, in a speech, in response, he called Dr. Paul naive for thinking that the PAP won't use handouts for their political advantage. Basically, the PAP set the house on fire. And then they show up with the fire hose and they tell voters, hey, if you don't vote for us, the fire hoses go away. Vote buying always advantages the incumbent because the incumbent can use state resources for political gain. Dr. Paul's story illustrates this. The People's Association chairman is the Prime Minister and the grassroots advisor is always the PAP MP or the PAP's losing candidate. So they can easily spend your money and then claim credit. But remember, as I said back in Season 1, using national resources to pursue a party political partisan agenda is the definition of corruption. So, what is the upshot of all of this? Fundamentally, our elections are rigged. The PAP does not need to resort to stuffing the ballot box to fix the elections because they have layered on so many different distortionary mechanisms that their victory is inevitable. It's like an evil kueh lapis. Our elections are not elections in the sense that we are choosing representatives to make laws and debate issues in Parliament, which is what elections should be. When you look at how our elections are designed, perhaps the best way to understand them really is just as a highly restricted referendum on the PAP's track record over the past term of Parliament, rather than any evaluation of the opposition or consideration of a different direction for the country or any of the other things that an election should be. In fact, the PAP could simply not campaign and still win 50 to 60% of the votes because that's how our elections are designed. But we must recognize that the PAP did campaign and did it very well in 2025. The PAP were not just sitting back and putting their feet up. What can we learn from the PAP's campaign and the evolving role of the Workers' Party in Singapore? And what can other opposition parties do to break through? We'll deal with all of that in the next episode. See you then. Hello everyone, Grouchy the Malayan Sun Bear here with a big thank you to all our members who've supported us so loyally all these years. The work we do takes up so much time and money, and we're a very small team working tirelessly across Southeast Asia, and we're so grateful for your support. New Narrative is a movement to democratize democracy in Southeast Asia, and it's supported by its members, people like you. So we need your help to keep fighting. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please do join New Narrative as a member or donate to New Narrative. If you become a member, you gain access to our website with all our wonderful articles and videos and comics and podcasts. And you can also interact with other like-minded people who are fighting for a better Southeast Asia, including all our team members, and have wonderful conversations about important issues in a constructive way. So, please consider becoming a member. It's as low as $5 a month, or donate to New Narrative at newnarrative.com/donate. Please like and subscribe to this video, and please share. Thank you very much.